September 15, 1944. Near the Dutch village of Mook, the evening air hangs heavy with smoke and damp earth. The front line is only a few hundred meters away. British soldiers crouch behind a hedgerow, listening to the distant crack of rifle fire and the deeper thud of artillery. The war has entered its final, brutal phase, yet the danger remains as deadly as ever. Somewhere beyond the trees, German positions overlook the approaches to the village. Any attempt to advance across open ground risks immediate death. Then a single soldier rises from cover carrying something unusual. It is not a rifle. It is not a machine gun. At first glance, it resembles a length of pipe attached to a crude frame. There is no polished steel, no elegant engineering, no sign of the industrial precision usually associated with modern warfare. Yet the men around him watch with anticipation. The soldier kneels. He adjusts the angle of the strange device. A moment later, a dull, hollow thump echoes across the field. For several seconds, nothing happens. Then the German position erupts. Earth, timber, and fragments of concrete leap into the air. The explosion is not merely destructive, it is shocking in its scale. Men who have spent years surrounded by artillery bombardments stare in disbelief. The blast has come from a weapon weighing barely a fraction of a conventional gun, fired by a single infantryman operating close to the front. The weapon is known officially as the Blacker Bombard. Its descendant, however, will become far more famous. That descendant is the PIAT, the Projector Infantry Anti-Tank. It is one of the strangest weapons of the Second World War. It lacks the backblast of a rocket launcher. It fires a bomb rather than a shell. It bruises shoulders, breaks noses, and terrifies its operators almost as much as its targets. Yet it also destroys some of Germany's most formidable armored vehicles and earns a reputation for devastating power. So devastating, in fact, that some soldiers later claim they preferred not to fire it directly at enemy infantry at all, because when a PIAT bomb struck a group of men, the results could be horrifying. This is the story of the British weapon so deadly that many who used it never forgot what they saw. The challenge facing Britain in the early years of the Second World War was stark. German armored warfare had transformed battlefields across Europe. Poland fell in weeks. France collapsed in little more than a month. Fast-moving formations of tanks, supported by aircraft and mechanized infantry, shattered defensive lines that had once seemed secure. British planners recognized a troubling reality. The ordinary infantryman possessed very few reliable methods of stopping a tank. The standard anti-tank rifle offered only limited effectiveness. Britain's Boy's anti-tank rifle fired a powerful .55 caliber round capable of penetrating early war armor under favorable conditions, yet armor thickness increased rapidly. By 1942, many German vehicles could withstand hits that would previously have proved lethal. Dedicated anti-tank guns remained effective, but they came with serious limitations. A 2-pounder gun weighed roughly 800 kilograms. Larger 6-pounder and 17-pounder guns weighed considerably more. Moving them required vehicles, crews, ammunition teams, and careful positioning. They could not easily accompany infantry through urban ruins, forests, or narrow countryside lanes. At the same time, Britain faced severe industrial pressures. Resources had to be divided between aircraft, ships, artillery, radar systems, and countless other military necessities. Every new weapon competed for steel, manufacturing capacity, and transport. The problem grew worse as German armor evolved. Vehicles, such as the Panzer IV, received thicker protection. New heavy tanks appeared. By 1943, the Tiger tank carried frontal armor up to 100 millimeters thick. The Panther combined mobility with substantial protection and a highly effective gun. British infantry needed a weapon that was portable, relatively inexpensive, and powerful enough to threaten modern tanks. The requirements seemed contradictory. A weapon powerful enough to destroy armor normally required substantial recoil. Managing that recoil demanded weight. Weight reduced portability. Portability reduced firepower. Rocket launchers appeared promising. The Americans eventually developed the bazooka. The Germans fielded the Panzerschreck and Panzerfaust. Yet, Britain pursued a different path. Part of the reason involved battlefield practicality. Rocket weapons generated dangerous backblast. Firing from enclosed positions could be hazardous. Urban combat often forced soldiers into cellars, upper floors, and confined spaces where rocket exhaust created problems. British engineers sought an alternative that could deliver immense destructive force without relying on conventional recoil systems or rocket motors. The result emerged from an unusual line of development associated with Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Blacker. Blacker had already experimented with spigot mortars, weapons that operated according to principles quite different from traditional artillery. Instead of placing a projectile inside a barrel and using expanding gases to propel it forward, a spigot weapon used a steel rod. The projectile fitted over the rod. When fired, a propellant charge within the projectile itself drove it away from the spigot. The concept would eventually evolve into one of the war's most distinctive anti-tank weapons. The PIAT entered service in 1943, following development by the British War Office and associated engineering teams. At first glance, it looked awkward, even primitive. It measured approximately 990 millimeters in length and weighed roughly 15 kilograms. Compared with a rifle, it felt heavy. Compared with an anti-tank gun, it was remarkably portable. Its operation centered upon an enormous spring. Imagine compressing a powerful industrial spring strong enough to launch a heavy metal rod forward with tremendous force. That spring formed the heart of the weapon. Before firing, the operator had to cock it manually. This process became infamous among soldiers. The weapon was placed on the ground. The firer stood on the frame and pulled upward with considerable effort until the spring locked into position. Many veterans remembered this as one of the least enjoyable tasks in military service. When the trigger was pressed, the spring hurled a spigot forward into the tail of the bomb. A small propellant charge ignited. The projectile launched from the weapon while simultaneously driving the spigot backward, automatically recocking the mechanism for subsequent shots. In theory, it was elegant. In practice, it could be temperamental. The bomb itself weighed roughly 1.1 kilograms. Unlike traditional armor-piercing ammunition, it relied upon a shaped charge warhead. This was one of the most important innovations in modern anti-tank warfare. Rather than smashing through armor using speed alone, a shaped charge focused explosive energy into a concentrated jet capable of penetrating steel. The effect resembled concentrating the force of a flood through the narrow nozzle of a pressure washer. Instead of spreading energy across a wide area, the weapon directed it into a tiny point. The PIAT's shaped charge could penetrate approximately 100 millimeters of armor under favorable conditions. That meant even formidable German tanks were vulnerable if struck correctly. What made this achievement remarkable was the relatively low launch velocity. The projectile traveled at only about 75 meters per second. Compared with artillery shells, it moved slowly. Yet the shaped charge meant speed mattered far less than explosive design. Manufacturing reflected wartime necessity. Production occurred across multiple British facilities. Simplicity remained a priority. Complex machining was minimized where possible. Thousands of weapons rolled from factories despite immense wartime pressures. Exact production totals vary between sources, but estimates generally exceed 100,000 units during the war. Millions of bombs accompanied them. To soldiers encountering the weapon for the first time, it often inspired mixed feelings. Some admired its destructive capability. Others stared at its bulky frame and wondered whether anyone genuinely expected them to carry it into battle. Both reactions proved understandable. The PIAT's combat debut demonstrated both its strengths and weaknesses. During the invasion of Sicily and later campaigns in Italy, British and Commonwealth forces employed it against fortified positions and armored vehicles alike. Its lack of backblast quickly became a major advantage. Soldiers could fire from buildings, trenches, and concealed positions where rocket weapons posed difficulties. The weapon gained particular fame during the Normandy campaign. In villages, orchards, and narrow lanes, infantrymen found opportunities to engage German armor at close range. One of the most celebrated examples occurred during the fighting around Arnhem in September 1944. British airborne forces, isolated and heavily outnumbered, used Piats repeatedly against German armored vehicles. In cramped urban environments, the weapon's ability to fire from enclosed positions proved invaluable. Resistance movements also benefited. Special operations, executive missions, and various Allied-supported groups received PIATs because they offered substantial anti-armor capability without requiring large crews or vehicles. Yet anti-tank warfare was only part of the story. Against infantry positions, bunkers, machine gun nests, and fortified buildings, the weapon's explosive bomb could produce devastating results. Accounts from veterans frequently describe enormous blast effects relative to the weapon's size. If you are Finn, some soldiers reported reluctance to use it directly against groups of exposed men because the injuries caused by the large explosive charge could be appalling. Precise documentation remains limited, and wartime memories naturally vary, but the weapon developed a reputation for extreme lethality against personnel as well as armor. Ding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. Compared with its contemporaries, the PIAT occupied a unique position. The American bazooka weighed less and was generally easier to operate. Early models weighed roughly 6 kilograms and used rocket-propelled ammunition. Soldiers appreciated their lighter weight and simpler handling. German forces responded with the Panzerschreck, heavily influenced by captured bazookas. This weapon delivered greater armor penetration but generated substantial backblast and required protective shielding. The Panzerfaust followed a different philosophy altogether. It was essentially a disposable launcher firing a powerful shaped charge warhead. Cheap, simple, and deadly, it became one of Germany's most successful anti-tank weapons. Against these rivals, the PIAT looked unconventional. Its effective range was generally shorter than some alternatives. Cocking the weapon remained physically demanding. Reliability could occasionally frustrate operators, yet it possessed advantages no competitor matched completely. The absence of rocket exhaust meant no telltale backblast. Concealed firing positions remained practical. Urban warfare particularly favored the design. Penetration performance remained competitive. Against many battlefield targets, the PIAT could achieve results comparable to larger and more technologically complex systems. Ironically, elements of the spigot concept reflected broader international experimentation with shaped charges and infantry anti-tank weapons. Different nations reached similar conclusions through different engineering paths. The British solution stood apart because it solved the problem without embracing rockets entirely. Assessing the PIAT's true impact requires caution. It did not win the war. It did not render tanks obsolete. It did not appear in sufficient numbers to dominate every battlefield. What it achieved was more subtle and arguably more important. It restored a measure of confidence to infantry facing armor. A soldier equipped only with a rifle could do little against a tank. A soldier carrying a PIAT possessed at least a realistic chance. Psychological effects mattered enormously. German tank crews understood that concealed infantry now carried weapons capable of destroying vehicles previously considered secure from close assault. Material damage was significant but difficult to quantify precisely. Wartime claims frequently exceeded verified results. Some tanks reported destroyed were merely damaged. Others were abandoned for reasons unrelated to combat. Nevertheless, documented successes occurred across Italy, Normandy, Arnhem, and numerous other theaters. The weapon also influenced post-war thinking. Shaped charges became central to anti-tank warfare worldwide. Portable infantry weapons increasingly relied upon explosive penetration rather than sheer projectile velocity. Today, surviving examples can be seen in museums throughout Britain and the wider Commonwealth. Visitors often express surprise at the weapon's appearance. It looks almost improvised, as though assembled in a workshop rather than designed for modern war. That reaction captures part of its story. The PIAT succeeded not because it was elegant, but because it was effective. As darkness settles over that Dutch battlefield in September 1944, the echoes of the explosion fade into the distance. Smoke drifts across shattered fields. Somewhere ahead, German defenders struggle to understand what has struck them. The soldier who fired the weapon lowers it slowly. His shoulder aches, his ears ring, his hands tremble slightly from the shock of the discharge. Yet the target is gone. That scene repeated itself across Europe, in the ruins of Italian towns, along Norman hedgerows, in Dutch streets, in forests, villages, and crossroads where infantry confronted armor at frighteningly close distances. The PIAT was never loved in the way soldiers admired reliable rifles or dependable machine guns. It demanded strength. It demanded courage. It demanded that men approach tanks close enough to see individual crew members through vision slits. It was awkward. It was heavy. It was frequently cursed, and yet when the moment came, when armor appeared through smoke or a fortified position blocked the path ahead, men reached for it anyway. Because they knew what it could do. They knew a shaped charge weighing barely more than a kilogram could cripple a vehicle weighing 50 tons. They knew a single bomb could smash through concrete, steel, timber, and earth. They knew that behind its ungainly frame lay destructive power, completely disproportionate to its size. That is why the weapon earned its fearsome reputation. Not because it was perfect, not because it was advanced, not because it looked impressive, but because it placed extraordinary power into the hands of ordinary infantry. A spring, a bomb, a shoulder-fired launcher, simple components, extraordinary consequences, and in the closing battles of the Second World War, that unlikely combination became one of Britain's most formidable answers to the armored might of Nazi Germany. The weapon looked crude, the mechanism looked outdated, the design seemed almost impossible to take seriously, until it fired. And when it fired, few who witnessed the result ever forgot it.